The shift in her was sharp enough to feel like a physical jolt. She stepped through the door that evening, setting her bag down without the usual thud, and her eyes flicked toward me like a scanner checking for something to hide. Not tired eyes, not tense ones, just focused, as though she'd been rehearsing this moment in her head on the drive home. She spoke, 2 sentences at most. I didn't catch the exact words because my brain was still caught on the cadence, clipped, brisk, almost clinical. My wife could fill an entire dinner with anecdotes, pausing just long enough for laughter. Tonight the air between us felt like it had been measured and rationed. I tried to keep my gaze neutral, though I knew my silence gave me away. She moved past me toward the kitchen, the faint smell of her perfume lagging behind like an afterthought. Not the scent she usually wore to work, something lighter, almost new. Her movements were quieter, too deliberate. The clink of glass against marble, the refrigerator door opening and closing without her usual absent-minded hum. It was as if someone had given her a list of motions to complete, each one checked off without overlap or error. I'd seen her upset before, real anger, real grief, and none of it looked like this. This was absence disguised as presence. I caught myself thinking of her smile, the one that used to crease at the edges, and realized the one she'd given me just now wasn't built to last. When she finally looked at me again, it was quick, like she'd been reminded there was an audience she had to acknowledge. "Long day," she said, brushing a hand over her sleeve. The words landed flat. I wanted to ask what kind of day, but something in me stalled. You can feel when a door has already been shut, even before you reach for the handle. Instead, I nodded, the way you do when you're pretending not to notice the change in temperature. She carried her glass into the living room, setting it on the coffee table without a coaster, something she'd always been particular about. The break in routine was tiny but deliberate, like a chess piece moved not for advantage, but to signal that the game had changed. It wasn't sadness I was watching. It wasn't even resentment. It was a recalibration, the way a person subtly adjusts their posture when they've decided they're no longer answering to you. That night, I sat in bed long after she'd fallen asleep beside me, her breathing even and untroubled. I stared at the ceiling, replaying each motion from the moment she walked in. Somewhere in the sequence, the woman I knew had been replaced by someone who only looked like her. And she wore that new skin just well enough that, to anyone else, nothing would seem out of place. But I could see it. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. 2 days later, she canceled dinner with friends we'd both been looking forward to, or at least I thought she had. The text came while I was in the middle of work. Something came up, let's reschedule. No details, no apology. When I asked her about it that evening, she didn't even blink before answering. They had to cancel, she said, pulling a sweater over her head and letting the words drop like a period in the middle of a sentence. The timing was too clean, too instant, as if she'd rehearsed it in the car. I remember watching her reach for a glass from the cupboard, her hand lingering an extra beat on the door handle. Then she gave this soft, almost misplaced laugh, the kind you give when someone tells you the ending of a joke you didn't hear. It didn't belong to the moment. That's when I noticed it on the counter. A silver stopwatch, polished and gleaming under the kitchen light. I hadn't seen it in years. Her father had given it to her before he passed, and she kept it tucked away in a desk drawer. She used to say she only took it out for special moments, the kind that needed to be remembered. Seeing it there now felt wrong, like a prop in the wrong scene. She caught me looking at it and smiled, but not the kind of smile that invites a question, more like one that warns you not to ask. Later that night, while she was in the shower, I opened my laptop to check our joint account. I wasn't looking for trouble, I was looking for reassurance. Instead, I found a trail of small transfers over the past few weeks, amounts too irregular to be bills, too consistent to be accidents. The name attached to them wasn't a company, not anyone I recognized, just a first name and an initial. No note, no explanation. I clicked through, scanning for context, but there was none. I shut the laptop before she came back into the room, the sound of the water still running down the hall. My mind was already trying to piece it together. Maybe it was a loan to a friend, maybe she was buying something for a project. But the stopwatch wouldn't leave my head. Objects don't just reappear like that. They have reasons, histories. And in our house, it had always been a signal, her way of marking the importance of whatever was happening. This time, though, I couldn't tell if the moment was for me or if I wasn't supposed to be in it at all. It was close to midnight when I first heard it, the low murmur of her voice slipping through the quiet of the house. I'd been in my office, pretending to finish work, but really just staring at the same spreadsheet for 20 minutes. The sound came from down the hall, faint but distinct, like she was speaking into a cushion to keep it contained. I stepped into the hallway and padded toward her office. The door was cracked just enough to see a sliver of light cutting into the dark. She sat with her back to me, shoulders rounded forward, the phone pressed tight to her ear. The tone of her voice was soft, almost coaxing. Not the tone she used with clients. Not the tone she used with me lately, either. Before I could lean closer, my weight hit the floorboard that always gives me away. She froze. In the same instant, the light conversation stopped, and her hand moved in a swift, practiced motion to end the call. She spun her chair halfway toward me, eyebrows lifted like I just caught her mid-thought. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked. Her voice was casual, but her hands betrayed her. One stayed resting protectively over the phone on her lap. The stopwatch sat on the edge of her desk, close enough to the laptop that I could hear its faint ticking in the quiet. It hadn't been there earlier in the day. Now, under the lamplight, it seemed almost staged, like part of the scene I was meant to walk in on. I gestured toward the phone. "Late call." She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms loosely. "Just catching up with an old friend. You wouldn't know them." She said it lightly with a small shrug, as if that closed the subject. Her explanation was technically possible. People talk late at night. People catch up with friends. But the words didn't land right. They felt like they'd been smoothed out before delivery, stripped of any texture that might catch on me. I nodded, the way you do when you decide not to push. But as I turned back toward the hallway, the ticking of that stopwatch followed me, slow, deliberate, unrelenting. Back in my office, I tried to return to my spreadsheet, but the numbers blurred. The sound of her voice, the sudden cutoff, the placement of that stopwatch, it all looped in my head like a quiet alarm I couldn't shut off. I told myself it could be nothing. I told myself that until I finally closed my eyes, and even then I could still hear the clock counting in the dark. 2 mornings later, she was in the shower when her phone lit up on the nightstand. Normally, I wouldn't touch it. We'd always kept a casual respect for each other's devices. But the name on the screen wasn't a full name, just a first and an initial. The same one from those bank transfers. My chest tightened, a low, instinctive pull to know more. It wasn't a call. It was a video message. The preview showed only the blurred first frame, her face, slightly closer to the camera than you'd stand for a casual chat. I hesitated, hearing the water running in the background. Then curiosity tipped into something else and I tapped it open. The clip was short. She was smiling in a way I hadn't seen in months, not a polite smile, not for show. It was warmer, private. She said something I couldn't hear clearly, but her tone was low, the kind you reserve for moments you want to keep between two people. In the background, on the table behind her, sat the silver stopwatch. I paused the video, staring at that small, polished shape. It hadn't left my thoughts since I first saw it back on the counter. Now it was there again, in a moment she clearly wanted hidden from me. I replayed the clip once more, catching details I'd missed: the tilt of her head, the way her eyes lingered as if waiting for a reaction from whoever was watching on the other end. It wasn't explicit, but it didn't need to be. The intimacy was in the pauses. By the time I locked the phone and set it back exactly where I'd found it, my pulse was slow but heavy, like my body had already decided something my mind was still resisting. I heard the water stop, the shower door open. I moved into the kitchen, pretending to rinse a mug as she padded down the hall in her robe. She greeted me like nothing had shifted, asked if I wanted coffee. Her voice was light, casual, but now I could hear the difference between casual and careless. Later that afternoon, I checked our bank account again. More money had moved just yesterday. The same name, the same irregular amount. No message attached. It wasn't just the stopwatch anymore. It wasn't just the shifts in her tone or the careful avoidance in her answers. The pieces were beginning to press against each other, forming edges I couldn't ignore. And somewhere behind all of it, that clock kept ticking, marking time I hadn't realized was running out. I told myself I needed perspective, someone removed from my own head. so I brought it up with a mutual friend over coffee. I didn't unload everything, just enough to test the waters. The way his eyes flickered down to his cup before meeting mine told me more than his words ever could. He gave a vague shrug, then a line about relationships going through phases. But his voice had that too even pitch, the kind you hear when someone's choosing each word like it might be recorded. I recognized it because I'd been speaking the same way at home. It clicked in pieces, the sidelong glances I'd noticed at gatherings, the way conversations sometimes faltered when I walked into the room. I hadn't been imagining it. People knew, or at least they knew something. That knowledge made the air feel different around her. I started catching patterns not in her words but in the absences between them. She'd text while standing just out of my sight, tilt the screen away even if I was nowhere close. She'd volunteer information about her day in neat little summaries, each one perfectly self-contained, as if rehearsed for delivery. At a neighborhood barbecue, I saw it again, the stopwatch, dangling from a chain around her neck. It caught the sunlight like it had been polished that morning. She laughed at something across the yard, tilting her head so it swung gently against her collarbone. Our friends, or the people I had thought were my friends, looked between us with expressions that were too neutral. I tried to join in, but every word I spoke felt like it was bouncing off a wall no one else could see. Back home, I stood at the kitchen counter, staring at that empty chain mark on her skin when she walked past me to hang up her jacket. The stopwatch was nowhere in sight now, but I didn't need to see it to know it was still part of the story. The quiet between us had thickened into something more structural. It was no longer just her I was watching. It was the whole frame of my life, realizing some beams had been quietly removed while I was still living inside it. And the people who could have warned me, they decided their silence was easier. I'd been turning over my options, weighing when and how to confront her, when she made the decision for both of us. It was a Tuesday, ordinary in every visible way. I came home to the smell of something faintly floral in the entryway, though she wasn't there to greet me. On the kitchen counter sat a stack of mail she'd already sorted. My name was on the top envelope, but when I slid a finger under the flap, I realized it wasn't addressed from any company I recognized. Inside was a form from the county recorder's office, a property ownership update. At first, my brain skimmed over it until I saw the highlighted section. My name, once printed alongside hers, was missing. In its place was another, a cousin of hers I'd met twice at family gatherings, someone who lived 3 states away. There was no mistake here. It was official, filed, and already processed. I stood in the kitchen for a long time, envelope in one hand, the quiet weight of the house pressing in. She hadn't been drifting aimlessly these past months. She'd been building an exit, not just from me but from the life we'd built together. The stopwatch, I noticed, was absent from its usual spots, not on the desk, not in the drawer, not hanging from her neck. I wondered if she'd tucked it away for the next special moment in whatever new timeline she was crafting. When she finally came home that evening, she moved through the space like nothing had shifted. She poured herself water, asked about my day, commented on the weather. There was no sign of nerves, no flicker of awareness that I might know. I answered in short, steady phrases, every part of me working to keep my voice level. I wasn't ready to show my hand, not yet. She had made her move, and I wanted her to think it had gone unnoticed. That night, while she slept, I sat in the living room with the envelope beside me. The ticking I'd grown used to hearing in my head was gone now, replaced by something colder. The game wasn't about seeing the stopwatch anymore. It was about understanding she'd already been timing something, and I'd just found out what. By the end of that week, I had my own arrangement in motion. She thought she was headed to meet a realtor to sign off on the final paperwork for the property change. The appointment was on her calendar, marked by her own hand, but the address led her somewhere else entirely. I arrived early, sitting in a quiet conference room with the blinds half closed. A lawyer I'd retained the day before waited beside me, a slim folder in front of him. We didn't talk much. The air carried that stillness you get before a storm, except this one would be entirely contained within 4 walls. When she stepped in, she was already mid-sentence, her tone light, rehearsed. Then she froze. Her eyes scanned the table, the lawyer, then me. The shift in her expression was small but precise, like a camera lens clicking into a sharper focus. The lawyer slid the folder toward her without introduction. Inside were printouts of every bank transfer, each one dated, each one tied to that unfamiliar name. The property documents she'd filed without me. Copies of the financial movements I'd tracked for weeks. All lined up in black and white, no commentary needed. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I simply leaned back in my chair, hands folded, and watched her read. The silence wasn't empty. It was heavy, deliberate, and it worked its way into the small spaces between her breaths. She tried to speak, but her first words caught in her throat. The lawyer waited unmoved, then began explaining what each document meant for the division of assets. His tone was matter-of-fact, not unkind, but absolute. Her eyes kept flicking toward me, searching for some cue, anger, pain, anything she could work with. I gave her nothing. No relief, no rise, just the scoreboard she thought she was controlling, now clearly tilted against her. By the time the folder closed, her voice had gone quiet. Not from loss, but from recalculation. I could see her trying to find a next move in real time and coming up short. I stood, thanked the lawyer, and left without looking back. The sound of the door closing behind me felt cleaner than any answer she could have given. It didn't take long for the ripple to reach her. The legal filings moved fast, faster than she expected, judging by the messages she sent that I left unread. The division of property was set in stone before she'd even caught her breath. The accounts were balanced, the debts clearly assigned. Her side tilted the wrong way. When the numbers landed, they weren't kind. What she'd tried to transfer, she now owed back. The cousin's name on the property form meant nothing against the weight of the actual ownership records. She wasn't walking away with a clean slate. She was dragging chains she'd fastened herself. The friends who'd stayed quiet, who'd watched me walk blind into this, didn't rally for her. They kept their distance, waiting for the dust to settle before deciding which way the wind was blowing. Without the advantage she thought she held, her circle thinned. Invitations stopped. The polite smiles in public came without follow-up. I didn't gloat. I didn't explain my side to anyone. I let the silence do what it does best, erase what doesn't need to be remembered. Packing didn't take long. Most of what I wanted fit into the back of my car. Before I left, I walked through the kitchen one last time, the late afternoon light cutting across the counter. From my jacket pocket, I set the silver stopwatch down in the center of the table. It caught the light just enough to make the numbers on its face glint. The ticking was steady, indifferent. I didn't start it, didn't stop it. I just left it there, knowing she'd understand what it meant the moment she saw it. Not a gift, not a warning, a marker, time's up.